I'd like to open up the debate now to the audience, so if you have any questions, please put your hand up or tweet us at York Union with the hashtag Tory York.
Thank you. Stephen, when you're going through leadership contenders, you didn't mention Sajid Javid, and I was just wondering why that was. And Dan, you mentioned that one hope for progressives is that the Tory party goes stark staring mad, and you said it happened before. I was wondering if you could tell us when that's happened before, like in government, as opposed to opposition.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sajid Javid is... He's just not as impressive as everyone would like him to be. You really see this when you're at Tory party conference, and he gets this kind of glowing introduction of, yes, like, oh, Sajid Javid, now he's a millionaire, yeah, he was born with nothing, etc., etc. And then he's just a bit boring. He's just not very interesting. He doesn't have a sort of spark to him. He just doesn't have, and he's not politically deft enough, I think, is the other problem. Then, yeah, the thing that Cameron has shown is you can get away with a fairly Thatcherite agenda, provided that your tone is slightly more emollient. So if you kind of, if you talk about, if he talked about the welfare reforms in the way that Sajid Javid talks about Maggie's back in business, people go, oh, that sounds a bit mean. But if you talk about making work fair, then it doesn't frighten the horses in the same way. I just don't think he has anything to him, and also not enough MPs like him. The interesting, because Osborne in particular is obsessed with the New Labour model, because it's the only time in his, or indeed anyone's, political memory that the Conservatives have been shut out of power for any meaningful length of time. It's the longest period of non-Conservative rule since 1763. And the interesting thing is that people like Sajid Javid, exactly like people like David Miliband or Douglas Alexander, were promoted right away. They have very few friends in the Conservative Parliamentary Party. If they're going around asking for nominations, the first thing people are going to say is, who are you? And he just isn't impressive enough to win them over. So yeah, I think Sajid Javid is overrated as a leadership prospect.
Yeah, I mean, I think if sort of boredom threshold was the criteria put in, I think that would probably rule out about 99% of the politicians in Westminster. I mean, remember, this is the party that once elected John Major, because it's famously the only man who ran away from a circus to join a bank. But actually, that's not true. But it's just too good a line to waste. In terms of the question, I mean, I think Margaret Thatcher went pretty mad towards the end there. I think there is some evidence she was pretty mad to start off with, but whatever you think of her. But I mean, although she certainly had her qualities. But I mean, if you look at what happened, certainly under the sort of fag end of the Major years, the whole sort of Tory bastards sort of phase. They did. The Tory party did show a great capacity for self-destruction there that they continued on with for 10 years, and it doesn't matter where you sit politically, where you sit on the political divide. When you do have a vacuum, when you don't have the sort of the discipline that comes with credible opposition and the political pressure that creates, that can create laziness, it can create mistakes, it can create arrogance, and that arrogance can then feed into sort of rather irrational behaviour. I mean, we saw elements of that obviously under New Labour as well. But praying that your opponents start staring mad is not the best political strategy. But it's all Labour's got at the moment.
Okay, do we have another question here?
Well, question to both panellists. Both of you on the newspapers, I see quite a lot of kind of articles about Dan Jarvis. And funny enough, when I was at an Andy Burnham event, someone asked him who he won for leadership, which was quite funny. So,
Andy loved that.
Yeah, it was at an Andy Burnham leadership event. Someone asked him that. So, do you think he's got a chance?
I mean, he's got a chance. I've got Jeremy Corbyn to do with the Labour Party. I've got a chance. Stephen's got you've got a chance. I mean, he's got a chance. I mean, I think the thing about Dan is obviously Dan was somebody who was being talked up in the last leadership election, and I think, as somebody famously said, the thing about Dan Jarvis, he's got a great backstory, but what's his front story? And that's the question about Dan Jarvis. I mean, he's got the biography, he looks the part. The question is, does he have the experience? Does he have the gravitas? Can he move from where he's been, which is, frankly, can you remember what his brief was, Steve? He was Shadow Justice Minister, where he did, well, I don't know what he did, but he didn't do anything that anybody he didn't do justice. But he, so, I mean, yes, I mean, he ticks a number of the biographical boxes, but nobody knows enough about him to know whether or not he's the real deal, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, my instinct with Dan Jarvis is, I was at the Fabian Society's conference. They had Dan Jarvis, Keir Starmer and Lisa Nandy, who are sort of regularly talked as post-Corbyn options, and it was fairly depressing because none of them acquitted themselves all that well. It's great for us that we get people who are talked of as leaders, particularly in the Labour Party, which is obviously the NS's patch. But I am sort of waiting for him to write something where I kind of go, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that before, or where he kind of adds to the sum total of human knowledge. I mean, Caroline Flint, who, people don't talk about her as leader, she was the first person in the last Parliament to identify that. She said, we've got a problem with Aldi Mum. When New Labour came into power, people were worried that we'd stop them making money. Now people are worried that they will never have enough to get by. So she talked about kind of the people who basically they've moved from shopping in Sainsbury's to Aldi because they're struggling to get by. And obviously it was Aldi Mum which screwed Labour every which way in the election, defecting to UKIP, defecting to the Conservatives. And I'm not saying I think Caroline Flint should be the next leader of the Labour Party, but I think until Dan Jarvis can at least clear the bar of being as interesting as Caroline Flint is capable of being, then he's very much not the. And my hunch about the next leader is I think that it will be someone who can honestly say, I did try to make the Corbyn experiment work. It will be someone who's kind of been in the trenches. I don't think it will necessarily be someone of his politics. And I don't think Dan Jarvis can honestly say at the moment that he has tried to make it work.
Yes, right at the back there.
Do you think the Tories are going to face a problem with the fact that the average age of their members is just going up and up and up, and the number of young people joining the party is just rapidly going down?
No, I don't, because I think this is one of the other things we learned in the election, the composition of the parties and the base of the membership of the parties and the size of the membership of the parties is just utterly irrelevant. I mean, I think what would be more damaging for the Tories is if they fail to learn the lessons that the Republicans in the United States are failing to learn, which is how demographics are gradually, slowly, but inexorably moving against their brand of politics. But again, that's a lesson that David Cameron has learned. That's why he's put such a store on pushing an issue like gay marriage through. It's why the Tories are now making really strenuous efforts to start to make headway with the BAME community. I think Chukwumana was. Did you read? I didn't read.
Yeah,
so they did something about how Labour has got to be, is in danger now of taking the BAME community for granted. So I think while demography could be dangerous to the Tories, I think they're aware of that. But I think the one thing, and Labour is paying the price for this at the moment. The belief that the person with most members wins is just nonsense. I heard time and time again before the election how Labour had this great people's army on the ground. The Tories were astroturfing constituencies, and you know what? They took the ball across their astroturf and they're not getting the back of the net. And they did.
So I think the thing about members is that most of my friends, depressingly, are members of political parties, but it's not a normal thing to be. And actually the problem is the more party members you have, the more that you are being pulled away from the country. So the SNP have a lot of members now, but the leadership knows that because the leadership is obsessed with Quebec, and what happened there after the first referendum is that the bloc took most of the seats. And there was a second referendum which they lost very narrowly, and it broke the back of the bloc as a serious force. And so the SNP really don't want to call for a referendum until they are certain of winning it, because they think they'll only get 2 shots. But their members are desperate to have a referendum as soon as possible. So the difficulty, as and when Nicola Sturgeon, obviously she's right at the beginning of her leadership, so the matter won't arise for some time. But if in 8 years' time she steps down and it's a contested election, the temptation, if you are running for the SNP leadership, to go, if you vote for me, I'll have another referendum right away, is really strong. And if the SNP hold that referendum and lose it, then that, I think, is the only situation I could see where potentially their supermajority in Scotland could even start to unravel. So actually having not many members is in some ways quite a good thing for the Conservative Party. If you look at where they've quietly effectively forced local parties to have ethnic minority candidates in very safe seats, there are some places where the black Conservative MP is the black population of that. They've only been able to do that because they don't have members to kick up a fuss. It goes both ways. The advantage of having members is if you go in an era of having no money. So Labour, for example, now, their members are much more left-wing than the average person. They're much more likely to read the New Statesman than the Sun, which sadly for my salary is not the case about the general public. But equally, the Labour Party can refinance itself through its members, which if you're in opposition is great. However, the Conservatives will always be able to refinance themselves through a handful of wealthy donors, so the problem's not the same. Their big fear is the London problem. So London's demographics basically are a pretty accurate guide of what the demographics of the country will look like in 30 years' time. And the Labour Party, for the first time since 70-something, I think, the party which won London did not win the country. So that shows that if the Conservatives are not on the ball, at some point there just will not be a majority out there. But of course the number of political movements which have died out waiting for demographics to save them is much longer than the number of parties who have changed in order to meet demographic needs.
Yep, over here.
So, Dan, you were saying about how Conservatives might simply implode if they kind of go on for too long, and obviously we're quite aware of the ideological divisions within the Labour Party. So, is there not a danger of this simply becoming rhetoric if, say, after May, Labour poll particularly badly, and the Corbyn experiment does eventually fail, which most of us think it will? So, to both of you, kind of how long do you give the Corbyn project, and if and when it does fail, is it still too late for Labour to win the majority in 2020?
So I think Jeremy Corbyn will lead the Labour Party into the 2020 election, or his chosen successor will lead. Labour will go into the next election on a Corbynite platform. What will happen to the Labour Party then is an open question. I think people underestimate how long the effects of what parties do hangs around. I don't know, is there anyone who is a Labour activist? Have you all gone knocking on doors? And you've all had, like, Gordon Brown sold the gold. And that happened in 1999. The positive and negative effects of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership will be felt on the Labour Party brand for many, many years into the future. So they can't easily shuck it off. But also, the Labour Party's constitution is basically an absolute monarchy. You can't get rid of the leader if they don't want to go. Why would Jeremy Corbyn want to go? I mean, he's never had as big an audience as he has now. If Jeremy Corbyn's bit of the Labour Party cared about losing, then there'd be Neil Kinnock's part of the Labour Party. Now, I think the Corbyn experiment is there for the long haul. It's there at least until the 2020 election. And it may be, look at the Republican Party. This idea that, Labour will lose and they'll come to their senses. I mean, the Republican Party has lost 2 elections on the bounce to a man it doesn't think is eligible to be president, and they're about to pick Donald Trump or Ted Cruz to be their presidential candidate. No, Corbyn is there for a long time.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think, firstly, because it's hard to remove him, and secondly, because those who keep briefing people like me and Stephen, they're on the brink of removing him, are always on the brink of removing him, and always will be on the brink of sort of removing him. So I think I fear that Stephen's right. And then after that, I mean, at the time Corbyn was elected, I thought there was a possibility that this could be it for the Labour Party, as currently constituted. I've now come to the view that it is a probability that we're seeing the death of the Labour Party as currently constituted. I know there will have to be something that will occupy that sort of centre-left space, but as Stephen said, I think if you look at where the Labour Party started off, I mean, only one of the last, when Corbyn loses the next election, only one of the last 7 leaders of the Labour Party will have won a general election. I mean, it would be 1 of 8, but you can't really count John Smith, God bless him. The idea that the pendulum has always naturally got to swing back, I just don't think it holds true. I think. I mean, I was saying to some. I mean, I've heard a lot from people within the Labour Party. Whatever Corbyn does, the Labour brand is still strong. The Labour brand isn't strong. The Labour Party brand hasn't won a general election since 1974. The new Labour brand won a number of general elections, but that brand has since been the subject of a product recall. And nobody in the Labour Party has a clue what is going to replace it. And I actually see the scenario. There's a lot of talk at the moment of will the right split, will the right walk away. I don't think the right will. I think what will happen though is I think when Corbyn loses and the Corbyn experiment implodes, then I think the left of the Labour Party, there is an element on the left of the Labour Party that will then just break away. I think the unions are already, virtually already going. When Labour gets routed again in Scotland, it then becomes impossible. I mean, I'm still not entirely sure how the unions are going to get through the election campaign in Scotland. It just becomes impossible for the unions to continue to advocate supporting a party when the vast bulk of their members in Scotland aren't supporting it. That will start the fissure. I think all the people who have joined the party because of Corbyn, they'll all be part of this breakaway. And also because frankly, I don't see how the Labour Party becomes a viable electoral force again, and without chopping off, without fracturing in that sense. If you think about what Labour had to do under Blair, the rebranding exercise it had to go under Blair to convince people it was electable. That is going to be as nothing to what the party does, as Stephen was saying. Jeremy Corbyn wanted to send out the nuclear submarines without nuclear missiles and wouldn't sing the national anthem. That's going to be with the party for decades. I mean, from the point at which Neil Kinnock stood up and finally confronted Miller, it took the Labour Party another 12 years to get back into government. At the moment, the Labour Party is, it's like pre-foot. This is the thing. I mean, we have never ever in our lifetimes or in British political history had an experience like this where you've had such a marginal candidate leading their party. The split between the membership and the parliamentary party, it's unprecedented. You throw in the boundary changes, you throw in the fact that the money is drying up, and I just genuinely can't see how Labour gets back.
Yep, over there.
Yeah, I think you made your feelings about Corbyn pretty clear, but I was just wondering whether you think it's a problem with the man himself or the policies, because what springs to mind is Clive Lewis. I think he's a very talented MP, but he's kind of like-minded in policy-wise to Corbyn. So I think I'm just curious if this is the problem with the man. He's been there for a long time, so there's a lot to dig up on for you guys. But for someone who's new like Clive Lewis, I'm just wondering if...
From my perspective, I said this all the time when I was, kicking 7 months out of Ed Miliband. It's not personal. I haven't got any personal. I don't really know Jeremy Corbyn that well. On those occasions, I do meet him. He's the quintessential, lovely, nice sort of nice guy. I think Jeremy Corbyn's problem is he has just been occupying this narrow sort of living in this political silo for so long that the guy's like a political battery hen, he's been, and you suddenly let him out into the world and you expect him to become the hen that rules the world or whatever, the guy, you can't expect it. The guy is, Jeremy Corbyn walked into a room, you know, a year and a half ago, if Jeremy Corbyn had walked into a room like this and seen this many people there, Jeremy Corbyn would have fallen down. You know, they've even seen an audience as big as this before. You know, that's how narrow. I mean, literally, Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party because him and about 5 other people, him, Diane Abbott, a couple of others sat around and said, well, whose turn is it this time? I mean, that's not a joke. I mean, that is literally, it was like, come on, Jeremy, we've all, you know, John can't, he's not well, Diane did it last time, what about you? Clive, God bless him, you know, come on, Jeremy. You know what, I mean, all right, I'll do it. I mean, that's literally what happened. I mean, I think, you know, you're talking about Clive, I mean, again, I know I'm a lovely guy, if Clive is the benchmark for talent, God, I mean, really got to help the Labour Party at the moment, but I think that there is a question for people like Clive, and I think this is going to be the interesting thing is, what do the left of the party do when they see, what do the left do when they see Jeremy taking the left off the cliff with them? You know, what does somebody like Diane do? What does Elisa Nandy do? You know, are they just going to sit back and watch it all implode on their watch? I'm not sure. I mean, but the problem is, again, we're just in such uncharted territory. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, when I was writing about Ed Miliband, you could just about analyse it. You know, you could some of it. I mean, and some of his stuff was out there. You know, but you could just see Ed would do this, this will happen, then Ed will do that. I mean, this is just completely beyond thunder. I mean, this is, you know, Yellow Brick Road's territory. We're off to the Emerald City with this. It's impossible to assess how this is going to end up. I mean, it really is.
I mean, honestly, I don't know. So, the things I feel certain about are the reasons why I cannot see Jeremy Corbyn winning are to do with Jeremy Corbyn's past associations and past statements. The original sin of that generation of the Labour left is a casualness about the IRA's campaign of violence, which was not because they'd reached a conclusion about the the politics of Northern Ireland. It was because of the internal politics of attempting to pull away a part of the Irish diaspora from the Labour right in local constituency battles. And in order to do that, they formed the same sort of uncritical alliances that the New Labour modernisers, the first generation, decided they had to form with the United States, because that was their diagnosis of what had gone wrong for them in the 80s at a national stage. And that original sin, you know, there just will not be a situation in which people ever vote for someone who appeared to call for a bombing campaign against British citizens. That is not going to happen. My instinct is, we simply don't, because Ed was such an uninspiring figurehead, we don't know for sure, was the fact that Labour's most left-wing posture since 1987 got its worst result since 1987 because of the posture or because of Ed Miliband? Was Ed Miliband so bad that it is impossible to say. I think the thing with Clive Lewis is he hasn't got a record of associations than his opponents can throw out against him. He does have that kind of stability, the appearance of stability about him. So I think it does at least give Labour a fighting chance. I think that he would at least have the advantage that, because I know some of the Corbyn supporters talk about moving the Overton window and making things more acceptable. It doesn't make anti-austerity more acceptable if it's associated with going soft on the IRA and deciding that the fact that the Falklands has voted by 90% to stay as part of the United Kingdom is a discussion point. That is not good for left-wing ideals, and Clive has none of that baggage. I think the thing is, with Clive Lewis, I'd say to you, I think Labour will probably lose, but I would go, but I could be wrong. I think it's worth a punt in a way that I just think the current trajectory is just a cruising for.
I mean, if you move the Overton window, Clive would fall out of it. I mean, Clive is not. I mean, this is the problem we're at, isn't it now? I mean, we are now discussing whether Clive Lewis can be the next prime minister of this country. I mean, this is the. But we're seriously discussing it now. I mean, aren't we? I mean, this is it. I mean, the thing to remember. There are times literally when I wake up and I just have to remind myself, Jeremy Corbyn is leading the Labour Party. I mean, you have to say that. You have to remind yourselves of that when we have these discussions. I mean, it's so actually perhaps I'm looking at it the wrong way. Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party, so maybe Clive Lewis could be Prime Minister. Maybe that's.
Okay, we've got a question from Twitter actually. It's how do you think the Tories will fare in the London election? Can Zach Goldsmith win it?
Theoretically, yes. I mean, the Conservative candidate starts at a prohibitive disadvantage. So in the states, you talk about states being plus or minus Democratic or Republican. I'd say Labour is basically plus 4 Labour, but a good candidate can get the 5 points they need to win. The problem is they need right from the beginning to create this sense that they are plausible. And Zach Goldsmith is very much running in that kind of, it's almost as if like there's been a meeting at the top of the Tory party and they've gone, right, who's getting beaten by Sadiq? And everyone else has gone, shotgun, not me. And Zach's been like, oh shit, I shouldn't have been looking at my phone. And his campaign is so anemic. And so it is possible for a Tory to win, but they just need to have a bit more about them, because he's already in that mode of kind of everyone's like, oh, Sadiq Khan, who's going to beat Zach Goldsmith. And once you get into that, particularly in what is effectively still a local election and a low turnout election, if I'm like the people who you have to turn out if you're a Tory winner are people in places like Bexley who don't really think of themselves as Londoners but will turn out if they think the Tory candidate can win. And I don't think that Zach is at all in that space. Yeah.
Do you agree with that, Dan?
No, I don't actually. I'm in a minority of one. I might probably include Zach Goldsmith in that as well, in that I actually think that Zach Goldsmith will win. I completely take on board everything Stephen's said, but I mean, I remember when Boris Johnson was selected as the Tories candidate. Now, Zach Goldsmith is Abraham Lincoln compared to where Boris Johnson was perceived at the time. Similarly, I mean, actually, you've got to say it. I mean, Sadiq Khan is not Ken Livingstone. So I think that I'm concerned for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think there are problems. I mean, I drew some mild criticism for pointing this out in an article the other day, but there are a number of people within the Labour Party who are concerned about the implications of Sadiq winning, because that will immediately be seized upon by the Corbynites as a triumph in London, and the Corbynites are well aware that they'll seize on that, which is why we had this bizarre article in the Evening Standard yesterday, which Ken Livingstone wrote an entire 1,000-word piece about the mayor election, which didn't mention Sadiq Khan once, did it? Which was incredible. So I think there is a danger there. The Tories are going to try and align Sadiq with Corbyn, and I think there will be toxicity there. The thing that scares me the most, though, and it's not something anyone's talking about, so I'll talk about it. I think there is a potential race issue here. I think when the Tory attack machine gets going, I think one of the great things would be Sadiq's victory would be the signal it will send if London elected a Muslim mayor. But I think we would be naive, especially in the current environment, to think that will not be a factor, particularly in those traditional outer boroughs that the Tories have been able to mobilise in the past. Now, I hope I'm wrong on that, but I'm still slightly, more than nervous. I'm actually quite pessimistic when people actually burrow down whether or not those combination of factors will actually bring Zach Goldsmith over the edge. But we'll have to do it.
We want as many of you to ask all questions as possible, so let's combine 2 questions. Yes, those 2 over there. So you first.
So over the last week, we've got quite a few articles lamenting over the STP, because we just recently had the 35th anniversary. And you mentioned earlier that we do need something to fill the centre-left gap when Labour inevitably explodes. And although most political analysts do say that the main strategy of Labour MPs is to buckle down and try and fight the fight within the party rather than defecting, rather than creating a new party. And I was wondering if the panellists still saying why it is that Labour MPs feel like they should definitely buckle down rather than they found the new centre-left party or heading to the Lib Dems, something like that.
Well, sorry, did you want 2 questions or?
Yeah, the gentleman next to you.
Could potentially the Tories, or if they don't completely not implode UKIP, start to break into the Labour heartland, where sort of working class constituencies, where there is a sort of perception where Corbyn's ideals aren't particularly, and left-wing principles may not be that popular?
What, two very interesting questions. Sorry, what was the first one was about the...
Oh, just given, we're just looking at the history of the SDP, why is it that no Labour MP is considering that, or why is it that seems so improbable right now?
Well, I think obviously the SDP stands there as a stark warning to anybody from that wing of the party who would potentially move away. As I said before, I actually think the danger is the left will split. I mean, I do think, having said that, it does slightly annoy me certainly when the Corbynites say, the Labour MP should knuckle down and rally round and give Corbyn. How can you rally round this? I mean, these people have a mandate, and it doesn't come from the Labour Party membership. Heresy though it is to say it comes from the people who elected them, and the people who elected them certainly didn't elect them to this. So I don't think they'll split, but I do certainly think, and frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know what the moderates in the shadow cabinet are waiting for now. I mean, if they're not going to move against this, what are they going to move against? And the second question was, sorry, it was about.
And basically, could someone start breaking
UKIP.
into all the Tories?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that absolutely, speak to Northern Labour MPs, this is what absolutely terrifies them. You've got guys, and obviously ladies, but predominantly guys, who are sitting on, 7,000, 8,000 majorities, thought they had a job for life, who are now genuinely terrified they could lose their seats because of the UKIP encroaching on their territory. There is a danger of that. I do, however, think there is a danger, and we've seen it with the sort of the Labour's ignoring the working class narrative, which I understand. But I do think there's a danger for the Labour Party that, having pursued a 35% strategy, it now starts pursuing a 12% strategy. UKIP are a danger to the Labour Party, that's absolutely right. But the sort of messages that the Labour Party needs to adopt to neutralise UKIP in the north are not necessarily the messages that Labour needs to deploy if it's going to construct the sort of the sort of coalition it needs to win the election in 2020 or 2025. I think that's and that's another of the dangers for Labour, is how you square that particular circle as well.
I mean, in some ways the two things are linked in that the problem is first past the post. So in terms of, there are some seats in what we think of as Labour's heartland now. We forget Stockport, Labour seat, was Tory until 1992. Wirral South had never been Labour held until 1997. These are all places which the Conservatives think, and in many cases the sitting MPs, Exeter is another example, believe that the Tories will take the seat next time. So the Conservatives will, if all of the historical trends, all of the polls, everything that history tells us about how voters behave, will take at least 40 seats from the Labour Party. UKIP, I mean, what the Lib Dems used to do is, they'd get councillors, they'd work very hard. Everyone go, my councillor works very hard, they're really nice, they'd get some more councillors. And then eventually, one Labour MP said, oh God, the Lib Dems, it's like knotweed. If you don't tear it out right away, then you can't get them out of you're pulling Lib Dems out of your ears for 20 years. Whereas the UKIP do the reverse. They get councillors, they start fighting among themselves, they don't do any work. The really remarkable thing is, if you're as sad as me and you don't follow the Britain Elects Twitter feed, you should do it now. It's become like this Thursday thing that, my wife's like, what are you doing? I'm just like, I'm checking what's going on in local council by-elections, don't and the interesting thing is, post-Corbyn, the UKIP vote goes up, unless it's somewhere where they hold it already, in which case there's a by-election and they lose it to whoever they were second to, because they're a bit crap. And in some ways, a very left-wing leader who appeals to Labour's middle-class supporters ought to be a gift to UKIP, but they're rubbish. They're not very well organised, and if you're not organised under first past the post, you can't get your votes in the right place, and so you just have lots of pointless second places. And for them, they'll have this problem that everywhere they gain councils, instead of that being councillors, instead of that being a beachhead, that actually becomes an obstacle to people voting for them again. So That's a big problem for them. With the SDP in this week's NS, which you should all buy, I've actually interviewed Bill Rogers, who was the sort of least well known of the Gang of Four, but he has been a Secretary of State. Shirley Williams was the most popular politician in Britain. Roy Jenkins is, I think, the best and unarguably the most influential Home Secretary of the post-war period. These were serious figures. There are lots of people on the right of the Labour Party who may be serious figures in 10 years, but it's effectively, what's happened to the Labour Party is you've got like some old-timers, you've got a promising youth team, but there is not a first 11 there. I personally think that Corbyn wasn't the Labour Party members going mad. They looked at 3 people who they thought would lose and would make them unhappy, and they thought, let's take a punt on this one who's actually saying something different. If there was a politician good enough to split off and leave the SDP, I don't think then that politician would need to split off. I think they would be able to win a Labour leadership election.
Any more questions? At the back there, and then over there after you. So you first and then you.
Okay, is increasing economic inequality due to Conservative policies not something that will help the Corbyn cause or undermine Conservative economic credibility in the long run?
And then I think you had a question as well. Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be an increase in anti-political sentiment following the landslide victory in Scotland, but the complete and utter lack of impact on policy making in Westminster that the SNP now have?
Yeah, the inequality, I need to pick up the inequality question first. I mean, one of the things, so many things depress me, which is most depressing. But one of the things that does depress me is the way that, if you look at, we're focusing very much on Corbynism, the faults of Corbynism. We haven't really critiqued the other side of the equation, which is, part of the reason why Corbyn's here is because of the sort of the moderate wing of the Labour Party to articulate anything that resembles a coherent political agenda at the moment. And what I'm hearing now from everybody who are supposed to be, Labour saviours post-Corbyn is actually what I think I've called just reheated Milibandism. There was this brief moment, immediately after the election defeat, when everyone in the Labour Party suddenly discovered aspiration. Andy Burnham was suddenly running around saying aspiration, aspiration, aspiration everywhere, and now everybody's just basically saying inequality, 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 which is is noble and laudable, but that is exactly what the programme Ed Miliband ran on. That he was going to campaign against inequality, and I think it depends on I think it all comes down to what Labour defines as inequality. If inequality means focusing on those at the bottom of the economic ladder, then I fear, in fact I'm pretty sure, Labour is simply just going to continue to marginalise itself. If by dealing with inequality it can somehow construct a narrative that appeals to those in the centre of the economic spectrum and contrasting their opportunities and their incomes with those at that small number at the very top, there may be something more lucrative there for Labour. The trouble is, though, I think the fundamental problem is how Labour can construct a narrative that doesn't make Labour sound envious and angry, and nobody's come up with that. And sorry, the second question was about
whether the lack of impact the SNP are going to have on policy making is going to increase.
Yeah, it is interesting that. when they arrived, everybody, all of us at Westminster were really excited about them, and they've kind of drifted into the background. I don't think it'll have any influence on the Scottish political dynamic, because the SNP have just got sewn it up. They've just got the whole thing sewn up. They are just, everything that goes right in Scotland is as a result of the SNP's brilliant governance, and everything that goes wrong is a result of, the nefarious machinations of the Westminster elite, and nothing is going to break that cycle. I don't think, and I do think that the broader anti-politics narrative. It will still exist, but I think it is sort of slightly start to run its course a little bit. But obviously,
I mean, the thing is, in some ways, the SNP's argument is that you can't get the brand of politics they want in the Westminster system, so it's kind of all to the good as far as they're concerned. And in terms of service delivery, as the Scottish Parliament gets more and more power, it becomes there increasingly won't be a body of things that people say, oh, I voted for this and I got that. I mean, not least because people say I voted for anti-austerity, but John Swinney is the finance minister in Scotland, who's, you know, like the last Blairite in office. So no, I think that will be fine for them, because it will just feed into the existing political trajectory, which is the SNP increasingly hegemonic. I think the interesting flashpoint is if we vote to leave the European Union, which is the point when we can all just tear up all of the United Kingdom flags, because we won't need them anymore. In terms of the inequality point, there is this problem with the hourglass economy where, you know, the top jobs are increasing, low skilled jobs are increasing, but sort of middle income jobs are gradually being got rid of. And there's this oddly Leninist idea. So Lenin said, you know, the better it is, the worse it is, the better it gets, in the dying days of the sort of Romanov era. Which is this idea people on the left now have. Then what will happen is people will have less and less money, and they'll therefore start to vote for the Labour Party again. I mean, the thing is, historically, the Conservatives have done really well in times of economic insecurity. The scary thing for the Labour Party is mostly social democracy is treated as a luxury good by voters. I don't quite know why that is, but there is a really strong correlation. Actually, people are more likely to vote left if they have more money in their pockets. And also, the thing you always have to remember is that under first past the post, what the Conservatives need is that sort of 36%, and if they're lucky, they can get it up to sort of the mid to high 40s. You know, lots of people did very badly in the last 5 years, but the key planks of their coalition, you know, dual income earners without children, who, you know, lived in sort of new builds in marginal seats, did very well. They've still got Help to Buy and all of the, you know, because, you know, the thing is, don't ever let anyone tell you Osborne doesn't believe in socialism. He just believes in it for the Tories' client state. And so they will still, you know, that 41% of the vote, and the really scary thing for Labour, even banking the problems with Corbyn's past statements, is we are now at a point when baby boomer landlords are a voter group, and it's very difficult to see what a left-wing party can offer to baby boomer landlords that doesn't shred their values and the Tories can't outbid them on. So yeah, I don't think, and also some people are optimists. They like the. I mean, you know, before I was working as a journalist, I was working in a restaurant and then a shop, and you always had this. You know, the number of people in rubbish jobs who'd say, "Oh, I'm voting Conservative. I hate all of these people on welfare." Like it just doesn't work like that. That's not how political change happens.
Any other questions? At the back over there.
It is probably quite likely that Cameron wins the referendum and then steps down and there's a new leader in, say, 2017. How likely is it that they'll call an election before 2020?
Well, I think obviously we're all working on the basis that the Fixed Term Parliament Act is just going to stay locked in. I mean, I don't see any. I mean, I presume it would require them to vote. Could they get the votes?
So theoretically you can know confidence yourself.
Somebody explained this to me once, how you do it, and it's very complicated.
You can know confidence yourself, and then you wait 14 days, and then you have an election. The difficulty is, and I mean this is why, you know, the hope for Labour in terms of the funding implications of the trade union bill is there are enough Tory MPs who genuinely do get het up about fair play, who are just not into that kind of stunt. And so it's difficult to get it that way. I also think Cameron won't go immediately after the referendum. He does want to see out, partly because they're very aware that the longer he stays, the more it maximises his replacement's ability to go, look, I'm new. So I think it's more likely that Cameron will stay until February 2020, and they'll go that way, because it's so difficult. The Fixed Term Parliament Act is a really bad bit of legislation in that it's created lots of weird consequences that you can't just repeal it, because once you've codified prerogative powers, they don't just vanish back up to the Queen or the Prime Minister, they exist in law. Yeah, it is much harder to have a snap election than many people think, and the problem is a lot of political journalists are not as uncool as I am, and so they don't understand that actually, this snap election chat is not a thing.
Any other questions? We'll have 2 more questions, so yeah, at the back, over there.
If we have a Brexit, what effect would that have on Cameron's leadership in terms of whether or not he had to step down and the progressive wing of the Conservative Party?
Well, that would change things. I mean, firstly, Cameron would go. He'd have to go. That would take out Cameron. It would take out Osborne as well, because Osborne would be the finance minister who was. I mean, Osborne's as lashed to that as Cameron is, and then, you know, the crazes in the Tory party really would then hold. Really, then would hold the upper hand. I mean, at that point, all bets would be off, I think. But I don't really see that happening at the moment. But now you pose the question, it is absolutely a terrifying prospect for all sorts of different reasons. So let's all get out there and vote to stay in.
I know. So my instinct is that if an outvote happens, it will be because someone who is seen by people as more reasonable. So yeah, Chris Grayling, Ian Duncan-Smith, those are not faces for Brexit who are going to win people over. If it happens, it will be because someone like Boris or Theresa May decides they want to make the big play to take Osborne out of the game and succeeds, which I mean I think is a terrifying way to view our relationship with Europe, but it is a calculation in the mind of some Tory MPs. So I think it won't change it will change the leadership of the Cameroon or Conservative centrists or whatever you want to call them, but I think the only way that it could happen is because at the moment the face of out is a lot of shouty men with out much hair. I think for out to win it has to be someone more reasonable, and the second you have someone more reasonable, then they will inherit the earth, as it were. The long-term problem for the Conservative Party is, why did Corbynism happen? Basically because people who voted for David Miliband left, and people who liked Ed Miliband or disliked Ed Miliband but thought he needed to be more left-wing joined. I don't know what that vote does to the makeup of the Conservative Party, but my guess is that it would change it, and not in a way which would make it easier for David Cameron Mark III to get re-elected. But yeah, I think it only happens if there's someone reasonable in that vacuum, really.
Final question?
Just wondering, obviously, looking at the SNP, and they did tremendously well in May after the referendum in Scotland. Do you think that UKIP might enjoy a similar position in 2020 if we do vote to stay in, but they have that ability to say, well, we told you so, everything's rubbish? Do you think they might, because the Tories are a slim majority at the moment, might they do well in 2020 and possibly concede to a Lib Dem SNP Labour coalition?
Yeah, I mean that's a pet theory for a number of right wingers. It's actually a pet theory for a number of people who are clutching at straws on the left as well. But I just agree with Stephen. I think UKIP's done. I think UKIP, especially after the referendum, I think they've reached the high watermark. And the point about the big difference is, you know, if you go to Scotland, you speak to anybody in Scotland, if you do any analysis of politics in Scotland, the independence issue is just at the heart of the whole political debate in Scotland, and it's also, you know, very much at the heart of the sort of Scottish political psyche. Europe is an issue that is of major concern to about, 5 members of, I don't know who's the leading crazy Eurosceptic. Peter Bone and Mrs. Bone, and that's it. It's not. I'm sorry to sort of belittling what is obviously such a major issue, but the reality is it's just not part of our. Europe is not part of our DNA. So the Euro vote will not have the same impact. One of the interesting things is we're all sitting here at the moment waiting for this great Europe debate to ignite. I'm increasingly beginning to wonder if it is going to ignite. Actually, I think we might just toddle along and say, right, we'll stay and then toddle off again.
I think Dan is exactly right that actually the SNP weirdly didn't do that well if you compare them to the classic performance of a party of independence. So if you compare them to how to what happened in Ireland in 1918, if you compare it to the performance of the Congress Party in India or UNIP in Zambia or the ANC in South Africa, actually getting a high plurality or a majority of the vote is about what you expect for the Party of Independence in that context, and it's very similar to what happened to the Bloc in Quebec. And so, yeah, the thing is that the SNP is a party of liberation, and so they can secure that kind of bloc. And also, it's the product they offer that no one else do. They are the Party of Independence, and Rise and these other new sort of weird offshoots of it can go whistle, but the SNP is the Party of Independence. And they're also competent. They run the Scottish Parliament well. You can talk about distribution and say actually, they're not that centre-left or whatever, but yeah, and that's an argument for an entirely different day. But they are very competent, whereas UKIP in office are not that competent, which is why they lose all of these council seats they hold. And also, crucially, UKIP will not be the only voice for independence. There will not be this sense of, oh, I voted to leave, therefore the only party I identify with is Europe. The people for whom Europe matters that much are already UKIP voters, but there will be enough, they're not going to be big beasts, but there will be enough Labour people who identify it. There will be enough Tories who identify it. Of course, I mean, this thing, Jeremy and John are both Eurosceptics, which is why they're just going to say very little during the referendum, because the Labour Party membership is pro-European. So there won't be that alienation that happened in Scotland. Yeah, and we already have a good historical data point for what happens after a referendum in 1975. Everyone kind of just shrugs and goes back to it. Of course, in 75, the internal management of the Labour Party didn't last as long as Wilson hoped. So it may be that in 11 years the Conservatives have a manifesto commitment to pulling us out without a referendum, but that is an entirely separate problem.
So that concludes our debate on the future of the Conservative Party tonight. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and thank you very much for coming. And thank you to Mr. Stephen Bush and Mr. Dan Hodges.